80% of our time is spent at work.
Mhm.
It was the last research number I've seen, 80% of our time. So that's more than with our families, our loved ones,
Yeah.
80%. And so that means if I'm spending 80% of my time with people in the workspace, how much do they really know about me?
Mhm.
So how much is honest me? How much is code switching me? I'm just a version of me.
Yes.
And that can be so conflicting, being a version here and a different version there.
Now available. You deserve to love your job. How to find your purpose and enjoy your life. You may not have learned this growing up, but you deserve to love your job. You will spend more time at work than in any other activity in your life, and you deserve to love it. Research tells us that people who love their work are twice as likely to enjoy their life. This book will help you create a blueprint to help you fulfill your purpose, love your job, and live the life you were designed to live. Now available at Amazon.
Thank you for joining today's podcast. And this is such an interesting conversation because it's about an area that so many of us have thought about and been challenged by over the years, faith and work. So today you'll hear a conversation between myself and Dr. Kenneth Chapman Jr. Dr. Chapman currently serves as a professor, an executive pastor, and an education consultant. Talk about faith at work. Dr. Chapman serves on the faculty at Texas Christian University in the M.J. Neely School of Business, where he teaches and researches the business impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Previously, Dr. Chapman served at the University of Oklahoma as a faculty member and founding director of the Michael F. Price College of Business, Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Prior to OU, Dr. Chapman served as Assistant Dean of Student Development and Diversity at Oklahoma Baptist University. In this role, he was tasked with enhancing the campus culture and instituting a diversity plan that ensured students, faculty, and staff understood what it means to embrace a diverse world. Dr. Chapman earned a bachelor's degree in public relations and mass communication from the University of Central Oklahoma and a master's of education and doctorate of philosophy from the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Chapman's research interests are in Christian diversity, student success, and leadership. He focuses on helping organizations embrace, employ, and engage in kingdom diversity and unity practices. Pastor Chapman, as I'll call him, because he also currently serves as executive pastor at Life Changing Faith Christian Fellowship in Frisco, Texas, and has been blessed to preach at churches and conferences at the local, state, and national levels. Dr. Chapman is married to Kimberly Kiera Chapman, and we get to learn a little bit about her in this episode. And they reside in Frisco, Texas with their children. So thank you all so much for joining today's episode. It is interesting and challenging, and I know you're going to enjoy. So thank you all for joining and enjoy. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Chapman, Pastor Chapman, Elder Chapman. And for the audience's sake, I wanted to share that, we get a chance to work together a good bit. So we both are members at Life Changing Faith Christian Fellowship, as our senior pastor likes to say, in the heart of Frisco, Texas at 7185 West Main Street. So we're both members there. And Pastor Chapman is the executive pastor and elder. So he's like the right hand to our senior pastor, preaches, teaches, does a lot of the things at the church. I work on our Leadership Training Institute, which is charged with just being good support in leaders' development and supporting leaders. So we get a chance to work together a good bit in terms of in meetings together. I get to see his beautiful family on Sundays in service. I get to harass you over email and text every now and then if we're working on something. Absolutely. So thank you for joining and for your time in discussing this really important topic. So.
Thanks for having me. Excited about the topic and excited to always get to work with you because we like-minded individuals think alike. And so it's able to take complex problems in the church or in the workplace and break them down and solve them. So that's what's fun for me.
Okay, good. Yeah, and this is a complex topic because I said I should award you for your bravery in wading in on this topic because I was telling you that I did a Facebook post just asking people what their challenges are as it relates to faith and work. And, what I saw was just a really big range of responses from some people that think of it as totally separate, whether that's based on their personal beliefs or their work environment. They like to keep it totally separate. And then another group of people that are trying to integrate it in some way and live a more integrated life. But the responses were really different. So just thank you for your vulnerability, as Brene Brown would say, stepping into the arena to talk about this topic so people can hopefully walk away with some things that are helpful, as they consider how these two topics show up in their own life. So I appreciate you being here.
Oh, glad to be here.
Yeah. So I thought we might start with just, if we think about faith and work together, I think most of us know what work is. How would you describe faith? What do you think of when someone says their faith and work? How do you describe what faith is?
Yeah, so I think faith is broadly defined. When I was doing graduate work, I looked at faith of students, and look, faith could be identified with Muslim communities, Christian communities, or just spiritual, right? Just that higher level of thinking and engagement, that deeper meaning, that purpose. I found some individuals define faith as literally just walking, letting their face blow, the wind blow in their face, and centering themselves. That's a level of faith. For me, defining faith is Christianity, as a follower of Jesus Christ. But I think faith is defined by kind of whatever the individual wants to define it as. And what those faith practices look like may vary based on what their definition is.
Yeah, which is probably one thing that makes this such a complex topic, especially as you relate to how this integrates into a work environment. So when you think about work and faith intersecting, like what comes to mind for you? How do you think faith and work intersect?
Yeah, so I think, it's complex and it's challenging because historically, coming out of a corporate banking background, where in the corporate space, you don't talk about, salary, you don't talk about politics, you don't talk about religion. And that was the old kind of business mindset. But now we have evolved, our society has evolved. And now where we haven't done diversity work, we're talking about, bring authentic self to work and identity development and all these conversations around identity. I think faith in the workplace, for me, they're not mutually exclusive because I think they actually go together, because to say they're exclusive means that I'm code switching, right? If I use that term, that I'm one person, one place, and another person, another place. And I think we've all been there, but I think what I've learned coming out of banking into education, public institutions, where, the separation of church and state, and there's a separation to where, the identity line is drawn. I'm doing a disservice to myself by not living out my faith in the workplace, but also being mindful of what that looks like. And so, each workplace is different, Fortune 500 versus, the mom and pop small business, but corporate policies. And so I think understanding what I define faith as, one, and then what are those faith practices, and then where do I work? What does that look like? And then how do I, what level of comfort do I have integrating across my faith into the workplace? And also workplace into faith, because a lot of the work I do as executive pastor, when we do leadership, LTI, we're doing that in the business sector, right? With org charts, support charts, and leadership development. And so I think it's kind of a bridge, but I think people have to find what they're comfortable with that bridge, and what level of frequency and what level of engagement between faith and workplace. If that kind of helps set context.
Yeah, it does. And I think I even noticed that in some of the answers on my post that, based on your work environment, to your point, public institutions, governmental institutions, it seemed less comfortable with this kind of integrated idea. And then some of the corporate environments, some of them actually talked about how things have been changing. And I was reading an article that talked about, religion or faith as like the forgotten element of diversity. Like we spend a lot of time on race or gender or even personality, lots of factors, but have kind of stayed away from religion, probably politics also would be in that bucket, because it just seemed too difficult or complex. So I'm curious, when you think about how faith and work intersect for you, has it changed based on those environments, or how do you think about how they intersect for you personally?
Yeah, so it has evolved. So again, coming into corporate space, it was very, that strict mindset, those HR no-nos we don't talk about. And, that was very early on where, didn't talk about faith, didn't talk about salary, didn't talk about politics until, you went to lunch with a person and found out, oh, that they are a believer. And so now that kind of opened the door for having, faith conversations. And so that was early on. But I think as I kind of evolved spiritually and got more involved in the church and accepted my calling led before my professional identity. And then so when I went into public institutions, state institutions, I've always been explicitly upfront that I'm a man of faith, but I'm also responsible with that, I'm not browbeating people. I know what, people think about people of faith and certain faiths, but I just want you to know that I'm a man of faith, but I'm also here to do a job, and my faith won't impact my ability to serve students, to teach classes, but it is an identity that I hold and that I won't hide, that I'm going to wear proudly, unapologetically Christian. And I think my work has allowed me to speak for that, how I'm able to serve a diverse students, work with Muslim students of different faiths, and that, we're interfaith relationships. And then what I've noticed is, having done diversity work, is like, to your point, ERGs, employee resource groups, and business resource groups, it was race, it was gender, leadership focus, but now we have, faith ERGs in the corporate space, where we're developing communities for people of faith, interfaith and different faiths, because it's such a compelling identity that we bring to work. Why should we have to turn it off? What are ways that we can develop it, encourage it, and live in it in our workplace, but also still get our jobs done? And so that's kind of been my approach to, and my involvement as I evolved over the years. So now I'm kind of unapologetically in my classes. People know that I'm a pastor. I don't apologize for that, but I also take that responsibility to let them know I'm not your typical pastor, because you can sometimes be categorized based on, oh, he's a pastor, he must be X, Y, and Z. Now I'm one who is just here to show love and grace and to help you along your way, whatever faith, however you identify. And so that's how I've been able to integrate my faith into the work that I do.
That is so, I think that's an important strategy, because I think you're right. A lot of us know that if you kind of share your faith unapologetically, like you said, then sometimes there is a stigma that comes with that. Like, people are thinking, oh, here she's going to be coming in with her Bible every meeting or class, or now she's going to be trying to tell me what I should and shouldn't do. Like, there is a stigma to that. So I think it's interesting that you've been able to both share who you are and respect. It's like, I'm sharing who I am and I'm respecting who you are. So I could see how that might make them more comfortable to share who they are, even if it's different, because we're both being just more honest. It's like a more honest space to really just be who you really are.
Yeah. And, 80% of our time is spent at work. It was the last research number that I've seen, 80% of our time. So that's more than with our families, our loved ones, 80%. And so that means if I'm spending 80% of my time with people in the workspace, how much do they really know about me? So how much is honest me? How much is code switching me? I'm just a version of me. Yes. And that can be so conflicting, being a version here and a different version there. And then I think that was part of my involvement as well, too, because, those believers that I would meet kind of just stumbling upon it, oh, you're a fellow believer, who would come and visit church, or we would do faith things together. They would say, oh, you're completely different at church. You're this loud and charismatic preacher on Sunday mornings, but you're different in the office on Mondays. How's that? And it was almost kind of like an aha moment, like, why am I different? And so I had to navigate, my level of comfort, sharing who I am. And so one thing I love about our senior pastor is, like, he is consistent everywhere he goes. He's going to hug on you. He's going to play. He's going to joke. Wherever we go, he's consistent who he is, and they know that's Pastor Dono. So, and so I think that's kind of the model just that I've grown into, just being Pastor Chapman, Dr. Chapman, Professor Chapman, Elder Chapman. Like, it's consistent. But there are times when I respectfully, not deny who I am, but respectfully, make sure that I'm responsible with my faith. And so, I've got to go to a fellow coworker, colleague. Her mom passed away, and they're of a different faith. And she asked me to attend tomorrow out of support. And so I'm going. And so even though our faiths are not the same, I'm going to respectfully be responsible with my faith and go in that space. And there's going to be some colleagues there who who probably don't know that I'm a pastor because I'm going to say some words.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be, am I going to live in that surprise? I never knew Dr. Chapman was a pastor, or am I going to walk that out in love and grace and kind of show them that this is the other side of me that you did not know? And there's no love lost. It's just another identity as, Black, male. It's just another identity, faith. And so it's just another hat that I wear.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Because even from just thinking about leadership perspective, there's a lot of research that says people pick up when we're not genuine completely, because like they don't know what it is, but they're like, something about, just something about that person doesn't feel whole. It doesn't feel like they're being fully who they are. And so to your point, if I have to leave my faith outside the door, and that's key to who I am, then I'm taking this energy to like keep it separate. And that energy, people pick up on that and they feel like they don't really know you. So I could see how, and to your point, you are really charismatic. You're super funny. Like, I mean, you bring a lot of energy and joy. And so, yeah, I could see how bringing that all together, and whether it's a work context, a faith context, whatever it is just, people would respond to that more because it feels real.
Right.
It feels real.
Yeah. And I think, we've talked about, having done diversity work, we're just in this day and age now where, when I talk to, as a business professor, I talk to companies all the time where I talk about inclusion. You can't have inclusion unless you consider the faith conversation, just like we do with all the other identities. And so now, when I get calls for references for students for internships, when we talk about, I want a diverse student, that conversation is now just, I don't want minority, I want gender diversity, I want faith diversity, I want Muslim students as well too. So now I think society has shifted. So now our business corporate spaces have shifted. And so now we're even shifting now to where it's actually, I think, more accepted to live out your faith. And I think in terms of, inclusion in different industries, Muslims have a right to pray and have a designated space where they can pray. So if we're true inclusion and true equity, then Christians should have the same opportunity in other faiths as well too. And then one would argue, well, we're opening up Pandora's box, and then everybody, however they identify, is going to get what they need. But research has backed up the fact that when people are valued, appreciated, and feel included, and their identities are celebrated, productivity goes up, profitability goes up, and overall employee satisfaction goes up. And so I think it's almost a cost that's, it's an investment versus an expense later on down the road with hiring, firing, retraining, and doing those things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because when you said that, when you're like someone Muslim may have an area to pray, Christians may have an area to pray, or just supporting people's different faith beliefs. I was thinking that, I was like, I bet someone's like, oh no, now I'm going to have to do all these things. But the reality is, don't you want to do all those things? Like, don't you want people to be exceptionally comfortable in their work environment? I mean, that's somewhere I'm going to stay. If I feel like I can show up somewhere and really be me and have who I am supported in that environment, that's an attraction factor that is probably pretty hard to beat. So I could see how it relates to so many good outcomes for leaders and companies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What have you seen some of the challenges people have in this integration, like in this integration of faith and work? What do you think are some things people struggle with, or just challenges people have?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing, several, but I think the biggest thing is, the assumption that all are alike. And so when we have the loudest voices representing, so I speak for my faith, Christianity, and so I identify as Christian, and then there's a loud voice in Christianity that says something that is, unorthodox or completely counter to, what we believe, then they become the spokesperson for all. Similarly with, African-American Black people, when there's one person who speaks, they don't speak for all African-American. But I think those loudest voices almost hinder us because now they categorize us. And so they think, well, that denomination, they're Christian and they believe this, so you must believe that too. The monolithic approach, I think, is bad. And so to categorize us then is a hindrance. And so then it makes me not want to share my faith because I'm going to be lumped in with that group. And then I think the other piece too is, depending on the industry or the place, what level of comfort, like if I pray over my meal at lunch, what's that going to look like? If I, have up, inspirational scriptures in my office in the accounting department, is that going to be seen one way or the other, right? And so I think those are the things that we have to talk about in terms of being level of comfort.
Those are super practical because I've been in that situation. Like I've been, a lot of us do lunches, dinners, breakfast, whatever together. And I've been at these meals and it's like the food comes on the table. I've had this moment so many times. I kind of have an approach now, but the food lands on the table and with other people that, you have the same faith, someone's like, oh, I'll pray over it. Or do you want to pray? And it's like super easy. But if you're not of the same faith, or that's just not a practice someone has, then it's like the food lands on the table, the conversation's going. You kind of hate to say, can you hold on for a second? Because I need to pray over my food. Like it creates this kind of awkward choice a little bit. And so I now have a strategy where I'll just, I'll wait and I won't eat. And I'll say, oh, excuse me for 1 second. I'll say a quick prayer and then I'll keep. But that is, those little things around, scriptures in your office, praying over your food, like those are moments where you have to decide, am I integrating and just kind of being unapologetic, or am I trying to leave it at the door? Like those are real moments. I don't know if you deal with those kind of.
Oh, absolutely. And I think those real moments create, I think that's faith development on one end, but also kind of the workspace corporate employee development as well too, because you're at a juncture. What do I choose? Do I, just put this away and code switch and hide it, or do I live it out? Because then it creates that conflict internally. When I was in corporate, there was always meetings Wednesday evenings, and when you travel, unless you're catching a red eye back, then Sunday you're traveling, right? And so I had to schedule my travel around certain days because I wanted to be at Bible study on Wednesday. I wanted to be in Sunday morning service. There are times it didn't work out, but the travel department didn't understand why you were paying extra to catch the red eye back to be at church. And I'm like, well, it's a faith thing for me. And so when we had that conversation, they understood it. But it was just, again, and this was early on when conversations around inclusion and supporting identities was early on, but it was kind of like, I'm costing the company a little bit of extra money for a different flight to get back, but this is who I am. And so there were times when I denied who I was to be in the corporate space, but then as time went on, I made that decision. So I figured out a pathway. So conferences, if it runs through a Sunday, if it's a Sunday that I can miss, great. But if not, I try to work around that. Wednesdays. And so it's more active control of the schedule and active conversation in that awkward moment. Do I blend? Do I, converge into who I really am, or do I not and just wait for the next awkward moment? So I definitely agree that those moments present themselves, and one that I had often and still do to this day. And so is, students that I work with now, colleagues, faculty, individuals who lose a loved one and who'll share with me that. And so in my faith, it's like, and as a pastor, it's like, well, can I pray with you? Can I encourage you? Is it okay to send you a scripture? I don't know their faith. I don't know, if it's appropriate. And so my strategy now is, hey, I'm a person of faith. I'm a pastor. Do you mind if I pray with you? And that opens the door. If it's no, I'm great. But at least I was responsible with my faith in that moment, in that space, to where it opened the door. And if not, then we move on. But if so, then I was able to kind of integrate and live it out.
Okay. Yeah. It kind of brings up two topics that I've heard people talk a lot about. One is these boundaries around what's important to you, your faith. And to your point, if your faith is, around being outside and just, whatever it is important to you from a spiritual perspective, being willing to put boundaries around that in a work environment can be challenging, sometimes takes a bit more assertiveness, and almost like this came up in the Facebook post too, a little bit of willingness to stand alone. And that's something I was reading about in an article, that one of the challenges of living out your faith at work is it can feel lonely, because to your point, not everyone's doing it. So you might end up in these scenarios where, you're having to choose, you might choose to do it, but you might be doing it alone. And that can just feel much more challenging for people.
Isolating. And that is, I think, again, giving everything these days with inclusion in the workplace. My hope is that those isolating moments are reducing, because companies are really engaged in diversity and inclusion. And I think faith is now one of those elements Because when you think about it, back civil rights movement, it was, African Americans were the one and onlys and isolated, right? When they got a college degree and made it to the corner suite, isolation. Those identities have always gone through an isolation period, but now I think that we're more welcoming now. There's some work to go, but I think hopefully those isolating moments are less and less, because that isolation can be very hard on your psyche and your work, and create work stress and then internal conflict, because who I am is not in agreement with what I'm doing and where I operate. And so that conflict clashes. So it's very intense.
Yeah, it could be a faith crisis for sure in some of those moments. And I was looking at a study by Barna, which kind of reflects some of what you were saying in terms of where we are of faith at work. And this was specifically about Christians at work. So this is Barna, I think, does research mainly on Christian populations. But they were saying that most people believe that you have a responsibility to act to bring your values to your workplace. So being honest, acting with integrity. So I'd say those things that are a part of a lot of people's faiths and also align up with the work environment, everyone's like, easy to do, got it. So like 80%, 70% said, yes, you should do that. It starts to drop into about 50% when you're starting to do things that maybe don't align with that work culture. So things like being humble or being a servant of other people. Sometimes that's aligned with the work culture. Sometimes it's not. So about half the people are like, yeah, that's a good thing to do. Right. And then it drops off to 20, 30s when you start talking about things that influence other people. So, share my faith with someone else, like you were saying, or I think things that are a bit more proactive, people are like, I don't know about that. So to your point, I think it's a transition over time. And maybe as more people share their faith, live out their faith at work, it creates a space where other people are also, just more comfortable doing that as well. But it sounds like right now it's still it's a challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think it's a challenge because of one of the things that I've noticed is, so being a pastor, Christian, and doing diversity work, because we have definitions of what things should be and what they look like. And when those are incongruent, and not lateral or intersectional, they're incongruent. So faith believes this, but the definition of diversity or corporate workspace believes that, whatever issue it is, completely different. Well, they clash. And so if there's no bridge or no intersection, then they're constantly clash. And so people have asked me, how can you be a pastor, a man of God, work at a public institution and do diversity work? Because you're going to be a part of things that don't align with your faith. And my response has always been, again, according to my faith, how can they receive the gospel if it's hid from them? Once I look at it as every opportunity to show love and grace, and every moment is not a preaching moment. Some just good human decency, just to show respect to somebody, just to be there for them, right? And so that's been my approach, is not this, got to quote scripture and got to give a 3-point sermon, which I will do and can do.
Yes.
Well, right? But it's just basic human decency. And it's not morality for me, it's Christianity for me that fuels that human decency, while others, it may be something else. And that's my faith. And I'll never forget, I left one institution that was a Christian institution, going to the public university. And there were people I respected who sat me down and said, you're crazy. Why would you go to a public space? You can't live out your faith there. Why would you do that? And I'm like, if I'm scared to go to a place where I can't live and walk my faith out, then I need to reconsider my faith altogether, right? Like, what kind of faith is that? And I've never had a situation to where I've lost a job or been called to the boss's office because of my faith. There's been some conversations, and like I said, but it's a responsibility that I hold and an obligation to manage it and steward it well, but also know where I'm at and be aware of where I'm at and how do I navigate it. Were there times when I preached a 3-point sermon? Absolutely. But were there other times where I'm just a good human being? Absolutely. But that was fueled not by just morality or just being good. It was fueled by my Christian faith in that very public government corporate space. But it was fueled by my Christian faith, not just from doing good.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, because, even if we think about just within the Christian faith, if you think about Jesus Christ, he was in a lot of public spaces. He wasn't, just like at the temple and, whatever it might be, living out life in a way that's aligned with the faith principles. So Yeah, I could see that. I think it's a challenge, but I could see that for sure. What have been your best experiences on the integration of the two? Like, what do you think is the most positive thing about living this kind of integrated life?
So I think for me, it has been people knowing that I am a pastor and knowing who to go to in crisis. I can remember situations to where, like, someone close to us in the corporation or at the institution passed away, and people were turning to me for, consoling and comforting. And it's only because they knew I was a person of faith, or even situations to where, they're going through their worst life situations, and they come to make an appointment with me, and they're like, "Oh, I know your pastor. I got this question." And so I think being that light in darkness, that lighthouse, and again, never necessarily being on a conversation about salvation and preaching a sermon about that, but just looking for comfort. And I'm able to be there in that moment for them, which builds a relationship, which, we look at the word pastoring, shepherding, being a shepherd. And so that has been the reward of kind of living out my faith, because people know where to go. And when I accepted my call and left banking, left corporate to go teach and preach, I just wanted to be used and use my calling for the good of humanity. And so that's always rewarding, because now people are finding me because they know that, hey, I don't have a childhood pastor. I don't know anybody to go to. Oh, Dr. Chapman, let me go to him and give this situation to him. And so it'll be some of the most randomest things. Hey, I'm flunking this class. Will you pray for me? Or, hey, I'm dealing with this. Will you pray for me? I know that you're a pastor. And the people that you think are not of the faith come to you, colleagues, and even higher level folks, deans and vice chancellors who you interact with, and like, hey, I know you're a pastor. And so I think that's the reward that comes from it. And I think the other piece too is, again, it's not sermons and Romans road to salvation, but it's just being some good. I think we need good in our lives right now, coming out of pandemic, all the social issues, just good human interactions. And I think, as pastors taught me, that he hugs everybody, but it's like letting people know, hey, I'm a hugger. You need a hug. And so that's one of the things I've been trying to implement in my life, is like, because I think the power of connectivity, just human touch, just a hug. Nothing is so bad that we can't overcome, just with talking, looking for the brighter spots, and just staying connected. So that's kind of been the reward for integrating faith in the workplace for me.
Yeah. I mean, as you were saying that, I was thinking, it's almost like if you were in a workplace and you were a physician in your other life and you didn't tell anybody, and then someone's sick, they don't know where to, I mean, it's like by not sharing who we are, whatever your faith might be or your gifts might be, people can't pull on it. Like they can't pull on that gift. It can't bring value and contribution to other people and to the workplace. So I could totally see that, like just people knowing that and thinking, oh, I know who I'm calling. I'm about to call Dr. Chapman to talk about this particular topic. And, we could do that with so many other places if we were all actually being transparent with who we are.
Right.
Then you know who to pull on for what. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And I think too, the other piece is, not everybody is as charismatic as out of open and as bold, which is based on your personality. I think, Kimberly, she's an ICU ER nurse. And so, she doesn't know the faith of individuals, but what she always does before surgery or before an interaction, she just takes a moment outside the room and says a quick prayer. And people don't always know what she's doing. They think maybe she's just thinking, or maybe she's trying to figure out what dosage to give. But she's praying before they go in and have these massive heart surgeries or take an axe out of the head. Like she's praying for them because of her faith at the workplace.
Yeah.
And that's been her way to integrate faith into the things. And then there's people who are Christian who come in and she prays with them. But then the atheist comes in who has a 2x4 in his head. And so doesn't believe in God, but she's a person of faith. So outside the room, she's going to stop, take a moment and pray, and then go in and then serve them well and nurse them back to excellent health. And so that's, another example of just integrating it. And it's not bold. It's not, charismatic. It's not, giving them strict or anything, but it's just kind of that own way of integrating faith in the workplace.
Yeah. I love that. I love that example for her too, on just, it can be different ways. Because sometimes I'll meet with a client and it'll just be so heavy what they're dealing with on me too. And I'm like, Lord, bless them, bless this situation, help it to all work out, whatever it might be. But to your point, there are ways to integrate your faith so that you're operating in alignment with who you are, even if it's not something that's bold or, I mean, you can pray. If you're a person of prayer, you can pray before a meeting
Absolutely.
without, you don't need anyone's permission to do that. So there are kind of other ways to integrate your faith, even if it's not things that are maybe, directly with someone else. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm curious your perspective on this. I've heard some people say, they're spiritual, or they're people of faith, but maybe not religious.
Mhm.
And as people think about their own faith, like, how do you think about being spiritual as it relates to, maybe when people say that I'm spiritual, not religious? Is that okay? Is that, like, what's your thoughts on that kind of idea? Because I know I've read some studies about religion in terms of going places is kind of like attending services, maybe going down, but maybe more people are spiritual. So I'm just curious on your perspective on that, because that seems to come up a lot with people.
So I'm glad you asked, because half of my first chapter is defining, religion, religiosity, and then spiritual. And so obviously, faith is a synonym, right, for, the religion, right? But religion is the practice that we do, go to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, prayer, fasting, that's part of our religion, Christianity, our religion, the religious practices. Religiosity is, how religious are we? And so Dr. Chapman's also a pastor, how much he lives that out in the workplace, that's my religiosity. And then spirituality. And so the best way for me to explain that is basically, relationship versus, the actual religiousness of doing something. And so we can do anything religious. I can drink Coca-Cola religiously, right? I can go to a place religiously. There are some religious Dallas Cowboy fans, right? Religious is the act of doing something that is sacred to that individual. But spirituality is more that relationship, in tune with something higher than you, deeper than you. And that can mean different things to different people. So for Christians, it's spiritual. Our spirituality is connected to Jesus Christ, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. That's our spirituality. For Muslims, it's Prophet Muhammad. It's those different things. So it can mean different things, but spirituality is more the relationship. Religion is more the practice and the act of doing. And then religiosity is kind of that level of where I'm at in terms of, am I full, all in, like always religious, quoting the scripture every time I open my mouth, versus I'm spiritual and I have a religion, and I integrate it as much as possible. So those are kind of the definitions that I use as I have this conversation. And so I think it's important to know that it's all relative to the individual, right? Because I know individuals who are spiritual, but don't go to church, know Jesus Christ as their savior and will be considered Christian, but they don't go to attend an organized religious service. And then I know people who are religious, but don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ and aren't spiritual. So I think it's relative to the individual, which gives the true meaning and definition of those terms.
Okay. That's really helpful. So let's say someone is on this journey of faith, could be religiosity, just trying to explore their faith further. What kind of thoughts might you give them? And this, I don't know if this is the pastoral hat or the professor hat, which one? It's both, I guess, because you're both. So what thoughts or recommendations might you give people on just exploring your faith? Because I think the more you explore and understand it, the more comfortable you are integrating it, maybe into your work. But how would you just recommend people explore further?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So I think it's like with anything we do. So how can I become a better professor? And so I'm constantly looking at teaching practices, how to engage students, 18 to 21-year-olds, how to become a better researcher. I'm constantly looking at how to refine my research skills, reading articles, looking for the latest and greatest. Likewise with faith, how do we delve into the materials that are out there, readings, devotionals, but also leaning into community. How can I learn what others in this space are doing? How can I call up Dr. Arlene and say, hey, you've been in some spaces I've been in. How did you live out your faith? Or help me walk this out, hold me accountable, and find best practices. And then I think one thing that is very helpful is documenting the moments of awkwardness and the moments that are uncomfortable. So I'm at a luncheon and I froze. I didn't know to pray or not, or I had a conversation with someone of a different faith. I didn't know what to say. mark that down, and talk to your wise counsel, talk to those mentors, see how they handled it. Go to the Word of God, of the Christian faith that we rely on, and see, we know, how do we live that out? Because sometimes the best answer is the first one that you employ, because what you're comfortable with, because what has worked for you may not work for me, and level of engagement and level of in that moment. But I think marking those down, you're able to kind of see and think through, next time, here's how I act. So now you've got from that. So when you're at a luncheon, you take a moment, you excuse yourself, and you pray, right? But that only came from that awkward moment several times over, and then kind of going back and assessing, what are you comfortable with? How do you reconcile who you are with kind of where you're at in that space? And then I think the last thing for true faith development is continue to push yourself to merge who you are with kind of your true self. Because I think the conflict always comes in when we are not our true authentic selves, because you walk away from there thinking, I shouldn't have said that, or shouldn't have did this. And it's almost kind of that impostership syndrome, the fraudulent. And so you're, praising, worshiping on Sunday morning, but yet you were in a situation to where you could have shared your faith or lived it out and been kind of a champion, and you didn't. And it kind of eats away at you. And I have many of those ones, like, you're a pastor, you just walk right past that situation, didn't say or do anything. And so it's like, okay, forgive me, Lord, I want to live this out a little bit better. Give me that opportunity again to do that. I had a situation, I was at Walgreens picking up some candy or something. So I was just in and out. I think I was running late to church on a Wednesday. And so it was on Main Street, and there was a elderly man in a car. And then everybody ran over to the elderly man, because I guess he had passed out and he was sick, having a medical moment. And so I went in, I got my candy, and I think it was for the kids, because the 5 kids always had me doing something. So I was running late, I was frustrated. And I came out, and everybody's ran over there, and I went and got in the car and started to pull off. And something told me, now you're a pastor, now you don't have a medical background, and I don't want to be nosy, don't want to be nobody's business, it's Frisco. But what if they needed some prayer or something in that moment? So I turned around, went back, walked over, don't know any of these people. And I said, hey, what's going on? They said, we've already called the ambulance, it's on the way. He's dying, like he's having a massive heart attack.
Wow.
And so I said, I'm a pastor, do you all mind if I pray? And so the guy who was there assisting said, I'm a believer as well, yes, pray. So we prayed, and then I left from there. And I felt better, as if I needed a pat on the back. But I don't know what happened. But in that moment, I was able to live out my faith, not necessarily in the workplace, but in public, right? And just took the bold step, because I believe in the power of prayer. And that may have influenced somebody to say, to believe in the church again, to believe in faith again, or to just live it out. It wasn't scripture, it wasn't a sermon, it wasn't everybody's going to hell over here. It was just, hey, here's how I am, being responsible with my calling, and here's what I'm going to do, just to let you know, so in case anybody's uncomfortable, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to move on. And then God got glory from that, hopefully in that moment. And then I learned a moment there, right? It's okay to be bold with your faith. And so I do that at workplace now. Is it okay if I pray for you? Knowing that we may be different face, knowing that you may know me in this space, but that's my calling. And so I want to live it out for the glory of God, and wherever I go, work, home, church. So the way it's consistent, doctor, pastor, elder, not just these various identities wherever you catch me at. So.
That is good. That kind of brings tears to my eyes. Actually, that is quite a moment. I mean, and I think to your point about exploring the tension, like when you feel that tension, that's an opportunity to say, okay, what do I want to do in this moment? And sometimes we make the right choices, sometimes we don't. I love that you were kind of going one way and had the opportunity to go do something different in that moment. That's like, yeah, that brings tears to my eyes. That's amazing. But yeah, like being willing to acknowledge the tension, to your point, write it down and fully explore it, so that you can decide, okay, if this moment comes again, what am I going to do? And I've had that with a lot of things. Like I remember, just feeling like I should have advocated for someone and I didn't. And I'm like, you know what, next time, bring me that opportunity again, and I'm all over it. Like I'm going to advocate for them. So it is a lot we can learn in not ignoring the tension, not overly judging yourself by the tension, but recognizing it and be like, you know what, I want to do better. Like, forgive me for that, but next time, I'm ready. I'm ready to do something different. So I love that.
In that, hearing you, so advocating for that person the next time, yeah, it's what a good leader would do, right? It's what, corporate development does. But you have that unction to do that because of your faith. So that right there is faith in the workplace. And so it's not always, just aligned just with a sermon or something. It's just basic practices that we do that is inspired by our faith. Because advocate to the least of these. Jesus teaches us that, right? Be the louder voice, the voice of reason. And so I think that we don't have to look for these just aha Billy Graham moments.
Yeah.
Moments in the workplace where we could, there were times when we had heated debates and heated discussions about, balance sheets and all this stuff at the bank. And so, and I would go and I would reconcile two parties. Well, that's biblical, right? Opposed to that I'm just playing aside, trying to one up for a job in a department. No, it's biblical to be a peacemaker. Blessed are the peacemakers. And so that's faith in the workplace. So it doesn't always have to be, just this crusade revival. Sometimes just small, subtle faith moments. And that's how we can integrate our faith in the workplace.
I love that. That is, yes. And that's daily. And, just like everything else, the most important things are usually those little things we're doing. It's the daily things we're doing to lead towards something. It's not always those big stagey moments, because a lot of us show up in the big stagey moments because there's so much pressure and visibility. That's sometimes the easier place to show up is in the stagey moments, in those little moments where just that it's like you see the tension, the tension. That's where we can really dig deep and say, okay, where am I? What should I really be doing in this moment? So that makes sense. Yeah, I love that. So any closing thought, because the last thing I want to do is do a lightning round just so people can get to know you better. But any closing thoughts before we do that? Because the lightning round questions are quite random. So any closing thoughts on faith and work before I just give people a chance to get to know you a little better?
So I think the most thing to important with faith and work is that you got to work at it, right? With anything, and that, get comfortable with who you are in your faith. And remember that, you're not an accountant who happens to be a believer and, a physician who happens to be a believer. I'm not a professor who happens to be a believer. I'm a believer first who happens to be a professor. And so it's that identity lead. And then the Holy Spirit will lead and guide you on different interactions and what to say and how to say it. And just don't equate faith in the workplace as, again, having to have a revival and having to lay hands and to pray. Like, that's not what it's, sometimes that is necessary. And I've done that in the workplace, right? But sometimes it's just somebody lost a loved one, send them a night note, said, hey, I'm thinking of you. You're in my thoughts and prayers, right? And sometimes it's, when you see a coworker who's struggling, it's just taking them to get a cup of coffee. Those practices makes the deposit kind of in the relationship bank, right? To allow you to minister to them. And that's living out your faith at work. And so don't look for the big flashy moments, those small, still moments where you can integrate and be available to individuals and be the light for them. I think that's what's most important. So, but work at it. And what level of comfort that you get with it will come from the level of work that you put into doing it. We won't all, wear a banner, bloodstained banner, say, I'm a believer across your head. Not everybody's called to do that. Some it's other areas and other ways, but there is a way. You just got to find that lane and how to work it so that way you're comfortable with it.
I love that. We can work on it. We can get better. Continually. We can get better. So thank you so much for sharing that. I love this conversation. I think it's going to help a lot of people think about how they want to approach this going forward. So a few questions just to help people learn more about you and just the work you've done and the life you live, et cetera. So the first question is, what's the most unique job you've ever had, would you say?
So a lot of people don't know this, but I was actually a financial crimes auditor at the bank, where I did money laundering and fraud cases and work with Secret Service, IRS. And so I would file reports on all this suspicious activity. And so it's kind of like police work, but without a gun and at a computer. And I did that right out of undergrad when I was at the bank. I did that for almost 5 years and really enjoyed it, but it wasn't my calling, wasn't my passion. And you deserve to love your job. And I didn't love my job at the time. And so I went and accepted my call, found my purpose, and now I love my job and love my calling. But yeah, I was doing financial crimes and actually put several people away, mobsters and things of that nature, from money laundering. So
really?
Yes.
That is quite interesting. And you're right, totally unknown. Right. Our whole church is gonna be like, what? Right. I love it. Okay. Second question. What is one thing you do consistently to enjoy your life? Like, what's one thing that adds joy to your life, or one thing you just do consistently just to enjoy the life you live?
So I don't know. I think several things. I'm with 5 kids. I'm enjoying. Everybody says that season of life, but we're at 7-on-7 football on Monday night. We got practice tonight. We got karate, and so I think I'm enjoying being a parent because it's amazing to me that God would entrust me with children. And so raising them and then watching them is like, oh, you are a decent human being. I did do a good job. And then I think the other thing too is just I love people, and I love church and just groups of people. I'm an extrovert. And so I actually watch other church services and watch how churches started off in a living room and grew to 15,000. Like that intrigues me. And so I'll read and try to understand and try to figure out models and everything like that. And so I think that keeps me kind of grounded, just kind of as I think a research nerd, just understanding life from different groups and a sociological perspective, I think kind of keeps me enjoying life.
Okay, interesting. Perfect for your diversity work as well, just the study of people and interact with other people. So I know you spend a lot of time with students as a professor. What are any tips you would give students kind of matriculating through these college years? I have one of those. So any advice you would give to students that are in these college years?
Yeah, so I think and research says 18-21-year-olds is the critical point in faith because you begin to question it. Because for 18 years, your parents have told you this is what you believe. And then after that 21 on, you've had some experience to develop whether I believe this or not. And I think it's okay. You don't lose out by being a believer. You actually gain. And so you're going to make mistakes. You're going to want to do certain things that are counter to what your faith says. But I think it's cool to believe. It's cool to be a believer. And there's a way to balance it out. Who I am now as a pastor, as an elder, which still blows my mind when people call me that. I was the same as I was pledging. I was an undergrad. I just wasn't as committed to the faith then. So I had to kind of go through some faith development, right? But I think that's the key is like, be who you are, but it's okay. You don't lose by being a believer. And then I think the other two things that I always share with students is the second thing is, nobody has it figured out. And so you have your life to figure things out. You don't have to figure it all out in 4 or 5 years in classes that rotate 16 weeks, right? You don't have to have it figured out. And so trust the process and learn and grow because nobody knows what they want to do after 4 or 5 years. And generally, what we get our degrees in, we don't even work in that space or field for a long period of time, if at all, once we graduate and go on. And then the last thing is love is overrated in college. You're not in love in college. Wait until you have a full-time job and can pay your bills. Then you can be in love, then you can get married. But love is overrated in college. Nobody's in love. Wait till you can pay the bills because love doesn't pay the bills. So I tell my students that at the end of every semester that these are the 3 things you need to know. So
I love that. Very practical, very practical. And yeah, I mean, you're right. In any 4-year space, if you think about, I hadn't thought about that, but the pressure we try to put sometimes on college students, even as parents, the pressure we try to put on college students to like figure it out. Like you have to know. And the reality of figuring out your whole life's career in 4 years is probably pretty improbable, even though we try to pressure them to do it. So that's a very good tip. Anything for parents? What would you say for parents of students? And you have children who are at younger ages, you have college students. What advice would you give just parents in thinking about some of these things?
So I always tell parents all the time, like your baby's going to be okay. And they're going to be fine. You survived college for those who went and survived those formative years. Your child they're going to be fine. I equate it to when I dropped my babies off at daycare and they would cry and they would scream and me and Kim would just boo-hoo. Well, one day I circled back and they're in there playing and like having fun. So the emotion at the moment, feel it, but they're going to be fine. And this is kind of a rite of passage. And also, I know you're paying the bill and I know that you were involved in their life, but you got to let them have this moment because what you do now will dictate what kind of adult they're going to be when they start adulting. And so, yes, still be involved and engaged, but kind of let them skin their knee a little bit. Let them, miss a meal, right? So they'll feel it, right? Let them kind of understand those moments. And then, but overall, your child will be okay because we survive the moments. They will survive too.
That is so true. That is so true. It doesn't feel like that when you drop them off, but that is so true. You're speaking to me. You're speaking to my heart right now. That is so true. Okay. And last question, what's a word of wisdom or piece of advice you live by? Just.
That's a great question. I think that, tomorrow belongs to God, right? Tomorrow will take care of itself. Just be present in the moment. I have everything I need to be successful today. It's just up to me whether I want to use it or not. And so that's financial, whether that's with academic, whether that's writing this book, whether that's raising kids. I have everything I need for today, but it's up to me whether I want to use it or not. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Sometimes these issues that I feel now will carry over to tomorrow, but we'll worry about that when we get there. Let's be present in the moment now, and then we can survive today. So that's kind of been my life of the last year or so, my life mantra.
I love that.
It's there. So.
I see that. One of the little ones. Yes, I love that. So, well, just thank you so much for joining. I so appreciate your insights and your perspective and your.
It's my life. So.
It is your life. It is your real life, a fully integrated life.
Fully integrated life, right.
Your insights, your perspective, your and just your ideas, practical strategies for how we can integrate our faith and work. Of course, I'm looking forward to the book.
Yes.
So all of our audience can look forward to that, a book that can give some insights and ideas for people on how these things can be integrated as well. And I think they can find you on LinkedIn, right? Dr.
Yes.
Kenneth Chapman Jr.
I'm on LinkedIn. And so, and little thing about me, I'm not on any other social media. I'm just an old soul and I don't have time, but I am on LinkedIn. If you need to find me, just find Dr. Greaves, you know how to find me.
That's right. I will find you. So thank you again so much for joining, and thank you all for listening in.